Bat family, how you doing? It's Scott, and I'm back with another entry for the games that made us. And this time, I am talking about the Milton Bradley game, HeroQuest. HeroQuest was a game that was created in conjunction with the British company Games Workshop back in 1989, and then just recently it got re-released, I think, in 2021. Now, this is very much a dungeon crawl. In this game, you got to play one of several characters, so it was very much, I feel, Dungeons & Dragons adjacent, without actually playing Dungeons & Dragons. Your classes were the barbarian, the dwarf, the elf, and the wizard. Now, of course, one person had to play your dungeon master of sorts. The barbarian was this tall, muscular fellow with a broadsword and basically was the tank. A lot of hit points, no magic. Your dwarf had a battle axe and still had some pretty decent health, but he had this unique ability to disarm traps. So the dwarf was almost like a battle rogue. It was really neat. Your elf was a person who had a short sword, was just as good as attacking as the dwarf, but the elf was allowed to pick an element to have magic from. And I'll talk about magic here in a little bit. They could also resist magic because they had some. And then your wizard, of course, was he was able to use 3 of the elements and therefore had like 9 cards. I just remember if I played the wizard, I always had a lot of cards and I really, really enjoyed it. But his weapon was only a dagger. Now, that being said, your storyteller, your DM, your dungeon master, I don't remember exactly what they called it in the game, but he sat behind a little screen and had the map out, and he would have monsters of orcs and goblins and chaos warriors and the chaos warlock. And sometimes you would have specific monsters because there would be different quests that you could do. Now, I have to admit that I love playing HeroQuest because it was a way to introduce my friends that interested in Dungeons and Dragons but didn't want to commit to a 4-hour game session. But then again, when this game came out, I think my 4-hour game sessions were actually 8-hour game sessions or 12-hour game sessions. I mean, if you listen to my last entry in the games that made us, and I was talking about Dungeons and Dragons, those sessions went on for a very long time. The game was so much fun because it was a static map, but you could always put the doors in random places. There was a way to be random about it because it gave you maps that you could be as the DM. You could sit there and put, oh yeah, I'm going to put 3 skeletons in this room and the mummy. I'm going to make this harder. You really had a little bit of customization. Yes, there was things that you could throw into the game that had a little bit of a civilized gameplay so that you were able to have rules and have structure, but a lot of it, especially me being a person who played Dungeons and Dragons all the time, we just kind of winged it, went random with what was in each room. Hence why I'm going to talk about this game is because HeroQuest didn't have enough for me. In fact, I remember going through my 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons book and picking spells from each of the schools of magic and making cards for each one. So that way, the elf, if they didn't want one of the elements, they could pick from one of the different schools of magic. And the wizard could then also pick 3 schools of magic and that's how they built their hands. And my friends and I remember when I was playing our version of HeroQuest, I would often pick necromancy because then I could have a skeleton that used to attack the other skeletons. I just always thought that was funny because nothing like using the DM's monsters against the DM. HeroQuest being one of the things that on this list of the games that made us, the reason why this is on the list is not only did it allow me to start my creative process of learning how to design my own games and design my own scenarios and how I wanted to customize things for my enjoyment and my friends' enjoyment. I also had to put it on this list because of who was at the table at the time. I unfortunately lost my father when I was only 11 years old. Now, that being said, I'm perfectly fine. I'm relatively well adjusted. Though I do like buying dice. But I'm very lucky because when I was a kid, there used to be a family restaurant that my mom and I always went to. And when my dad unfortunately passed, our waiter, his name was Dave, he asked my mother if it was all right for him to stop by and pick me up because he had a son that was close to my age, and his name is Chad. So every other weekend, Dave would stop by my house, pick me up, and we would go grab his son if he hadn't already, and we would eat pizza and play board games and play Magic and stuff like that. But the game that was typically always on the table was HeroQuest. We just really enjoyed it. You sit there and you're building stuff, and like in 1990, there was a HeroQuest adventure design kit that was made, which was the big pad of maps so that you could design your own stuff. There was different expansions that were made for this game, and it added more monsters and more bad guys. And in fact, they even had a advanced HeroQuest, which was even more monsters and new classes and new items and spells. We loved it. We had a great time playing it. The fact that I figured out a way to personalize this game to make it my own so that my friends and I had a blast. This game really helped me become a storyteller, helped me figure out ways to customize things for my friends, and allowed me to create. HeroQuest did the expansion thing just like other board games have before and will continue to do. HeroQuest had a Barbarian Quest pack. It was known as the Frozen Horror. And they also had an Elf Quest pack, which was known as Mage of the Mirror. I do know that they happen to have to change it called Quest Pack for the Elf because there is an Elf Quest game. But I just remember getting all of the stuff for this game, so that I think it's probably where I started doing my set collection. I have to get everything for one game. It is absolutely horrible to be a completionist. So yeah, when HeroQuest started having expansions, I was fully on board. But then again, that was more stuff for me to customize and be able to use for my friends. The other reason why I bring up this game is because I just recently lost my friend Dave. He was a bright light and was such an incredible man to sit here and decide that I'm going to help this young boy out and give him a father figure since he just lost his dad. Through Dave, I learned about Battletech, also learned how to play Starfleet Battles, which was his game of choice, which I might have to talk about at some point in time in the future. The game HeroQuest was one of those things that allowed me to be creative, building stories, making maps, incredible dungeons, throwing in traps, throwing the monsters out in front of people, without all the fuss and muss of Dungeons and Dragons and all the books from an earlier episode. You know I like Dungeons and Dragons and I have all the books, but HeroQuest had that nice thing of it was all in one box and I could take it with me easily. And that's one of the reasons why HeroQuest happens to be one of the games that made me. So thanks, Bat Family, for listening. I promise that the next game I talk about won't have any tragic bits in it. Hope you guys do well, and thanks for listening. Bye.